Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. My name is Isabel. I am an event planner for the Reactor, joining you live from Sydney, Australia. Before we begin this session, we have a quick housekeeping. We're committed to fostering a welcoming, inclusive, and supportive environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, please let's keep the comments respectful, professional, and constructive throughout today's session. This session is being recorded and will be available to view on demand within 24 to 48 hours right here on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. And if this is your first time attending a Microsoft Reactor session, please note that you must create a YouTube account in order to have access and interact in the chat. You can set up that now. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us on social media or through our website. Thank you all for joining us on the third session of this series called the Data Governance Mixtape. I am excited to introduce our fantastic speaker, MJ, and will now be handing over the spotlight to him. Take it away, MJ.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and welcome. And thanks, Isabel, as usual. And welcome again to the third track of this Data Governance Mixtape. All right. So this particular series is all things about data governance, right? Because the reality is there's just so many things to talk about in terms of data. There are a lot of things happening in the cloud space, in Fabric, in different Azure services here and there. But I really want to focus my lens as well in the next couple of months or maybe even a few years, really, to talk more about data governance and how that applies to a lot of day-to-day or even real-world scenarios, right? Okay, so in this one, we're gonna talk about security blues. Okay, so that means in the past two mixtapes, we've been focusing more around data discovery or data mapping, or kind of like trying to connect the dots between Purview and other Azure or Microsoft services, right? But this time around, I want to quickly pivot towards a little bit of security, right? All the security itself is a very wide topic of its own. And when you talk about security, you can talk about many different things, and there are many different layers, and there are many different aspects of it, and there are many different products, services out there as well, even within or outside of the Microsoft ecosystem. All right, now let's quickly have the opening riff. What are the security challenge that we have in terms of data? Woke up this morning, data everywhere, right? So some of the modern data governance blues, right, or some challenges that we're seeing is that data scattered across on-prem, multi-cloud, and SaaS environments is very common, or what we call data silos. Managing quality data in the era of AI is kind of like becoming challenging because everyone's doing a lot of shortcuts and doing a lot of this, like just chat to your own data and stuff like that, and that just opens up a lot of problems in terms of like your data quality. Then trying to understand what's human and non-human um, actors, especially accessing sensitive data or information. Then, of course, we have a lot of compliance happening around, and it's getting stricter as days go by, right? But in today's reality check is that if you are in the ecosystem or if you're kind of like in this space, the reality is it's far from perfect, right? Like even the Microsoft ecosystem itself is even expanding, and it's becoming even much more confusing to an extent. Wherein we now have Entra, we have Defender, we have Purview, we have Sentinel, and then we have Copilot, we have AI Foundry, we have this, and we have Copilot Studio, and like we have so many options, right? And a little bit of this and that have a little bit of security as well, and it just becomes really challenging. And then data governance, in essence, is not just about cataloging, which what was the focus in the past few tracks, right? That were about cataloging data. We're trying to have um, visibility of things, but it's about securing access as well at every touch point. Then lastly is that you know d- um, it is very interesting to say that we want a framework or a mental model in place, right, when talking about security. And it's really just about zero trust principle, and that must be extended to the data as well, so not just the networks, right? So the concept of zero trust mostly applies in networking point of view, but that can also be extended to data. All right. And where does Entra comes in, right? So Entra is fundamentally it's about your authentication and authorization, meaning can you access something and are you authorized to access that thing, right? So fundamentally, that's like the main feature of Entra, and that's through a concept called RBAC or role-based access control. So that's kind of like creating the foundation around that. And then, as part of that as well, Entra really enforces, especially accessing important resources these days, such as I would say Azure, right? You're now required to do a multi-factor authentication, and it really promotes the concept of single sign-on and conditional access policies as well, which basically means that um, and because we're now entering this SaaS era, right? Like what that means is that a lot of these services like Fabric, Purview, or even Entra to an extent, right, and other services, they're since they're SaaS-based solutions, we don't li- uh, we don't spin up platforms around that. We don't configure networking around that. The networking is usually hosted in the provider's backbone, right? So that means that in one level of defense that you can apply is to apply this thing called conditional access policy, meaning even though you have a valid account, even though you can, let's say, access your email, your Outlook, right? You can apply some conditional access policies that would restrict you to access, let's say, Fabric, right, or Purview or other services. Then it also allows you to have that concept of PIM or privileged identity management for data administrators or even to a higher level requirements. Okay, the integration around here is that the identity verification become before any data operation, and the idea is that these RBAC rules are aligned to data classification as well. Okay, so what does that mean? So that means that ideally you don't tie in anything in terms of security to an individual level, right? So meaning ideally you create like security groups. Okay, so meaning, let's say you have this set of users. Instead of tagging each and every one of them, you actually apply either a policy or security policies into a group level, right? And then you just allow people to come in and out of that group, and that's their onboarding and offboarding capability. And so a lot of these policies are then inherited and removed based off your actual grouping, right? Now, let's talk about sensitivity label. Right. So for today, we'll be focusing on what Purview can offer in terms of sensitivity label. All right. So now we're entering the encore, okay, which is the classify and protect. Okay. So now, this concept of sensitivity label of Purview is basically a capability to create labels and manage them. Right. So why is this important? It's very straightforward, right? Like it's a way to classify data. Right. So remember, if you attended the previous tracks, you can actually classify data as well and apply some sensitivity label, let's say on a table perspective or even on a column perspective, right? The idea here is that it's something that becomes a service or it's a capability of Purview that you can actually apply on other things. All right. So what label capabilities provide is it gives you a visual marking for, let's say, for file-based data. So it gives you some headers, footers, watermarks, which I'll show you later on. And then it also gives you encryption, so file level and container level protection. And then this is where it gets interesting. It can also perform an access restriction, right? So meaning by applying a label, you can perform an access restriction, and that's where it really works with Entra, right? So that's kind of like the common ground between Purview and Entra, wherein like this label applies to this restriction or this access restriction. All right. Well, I'll show you that in a bit. And then lastly is we can also implement some metadata such as business context and some compliance requirements. Okay. So in Purview, there are many solutions out there, right? And particularly for this one, we are talking about information protection. All right. So we'll be dealing with the information protection solution. Okay. So in the past, we've been focused on the data mapping, and there are more solutions in Purview, and we have the next few months and years to discuss all of them. All right, and as Purview keeps growing, and as more things happen in this industry in the data governance, the more things we're gonna be talking about, right, in this particular series. Okay, so we're gonna be focusing on the information protection capability of Purview. All right, now where does it where does it really works? Okay, so you can basically apply some cross-platform label application. Okay, so this is what we call UDP or Universal Data Protection. All right, so with the UDP, you can set the sensitivity labels created in Purview, information protection, right? And that can be extended to uh, data map, SharePoint, Teams, Power BI, and even SQL, right? So here are some integration points. So in Office apps, we can integrate that to Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or even Outlook. In cloud storage, you can also apply that to SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. And with databases, for now, it's Azure SQL and SQL Server columns. And in Power BI, that applies to both the datasets and reports. And you can also extend that to other third-party applications via the Microsoft Information Protection SDK. All right. So the one aspect of this one as well that allows what makes this powerful, right, is that Purview doesn't just let you create the label itself. It would also allow you to perform some auto labeling policies as well. So you can create some intelligent classification around that. When the data is next scanned, Purview can kind of like um, check if these conditions are met and then apply the right sensitivity label. Okay, so with these auto labeling scenarios, it's context based, whether it's keywords, patterns, or classifiers. And eventually, it's also AI powered. So it can be a machine learning classifier as well. All right. Now, furthermore, with some blues around here, is that maybe on the next track we can talk more about DLP and sensitivity level integration. But basically, just kind of give you a sneak peek that the idea of DLP or data loss prevention policy is that it's a guidance or a guardrails for a misuse, right? Or so that you don't misuse things in terms of data. So, for example, would be blocking sharing of confidential label information, right? And there are many controls around that. So, such as right, like you cannot print that, you cannot share that, you cannot do this and that, right? So a lot of those data exfiltration, it's kind of like covered as part of that. And then things around requiring justification for removing the sensitivity label, which I'll show you later on. And then alerting on bulk download of sensitive data as well. And even printing. So you can even restrict the printing of restricted documents. Right. So now let's go to some live performance. Okay. All right. So just give me a second as I move into the demo. Okay. All right. So there you go. Okay. So in Purview, you do have a lot of solutions in here. So you can go view all solutions in here. And yeah, we've talked about data map. And now we're going to go talk about information protection. All right. So in information protection, the core here would be, by the way, the recommendation is something that would really come up later on as you do more labeling and stuff like that. But in here, the core thing that you want to do is first create a sensitivity label. All right. So when you create a label, all right, so there's a 3 life cycle here. First is creating a label. So when you perform that, so I'll guide you through that. Allows you to configure that label. And then once you've created that label, you can then publish a label. And then later on, you can also export that label. All right. So now first, let's create a label. Let's say we can name it as something like confidential, right? And then the display name is confidential as well. The priority is highest, right? Yeah, but you can also change that after it's created. Then some description here, must not share to others, right? And just some description as well for others. And then there it even comes with a label color. So usually everyone wants to go with the red, and there's no red here, right? There's only orange. All right. Again, let's say just green. Okay. Now with here, right? This is where you define the scope of this particular label, right? So where do you want to apply this label? Okay, so are you applying it to files and data sets? So the data sets includes in Microsoft 365 and Fabric, particularly the semantic model, right? And Microsoft Azure, which is the Azure SQL. And you can also apply that to emails and as well as meetings as well. So you can label calendar events even, right? When you do it in Outlook or Teams, right? Then from that, you can also control access, which like these are the kind of like protection settings that you want to consider as part of this label. So let's say you want to take control access, apply content marking, as well as protect Teams meeting and chat. You can also do that, but that would only be applicable if you have a Teams premium license. All right. Okay, so first let's talk about access control. So in terms of the access control, you do check, let's say, assign permissions, right? So where do you assign that permission? Do you want to assign that permission now, or you want to decide later? Right, let's choose now. And then in the user access to content expires, usually you set never, but because most likely, let's say, the general labels that you're gonna apply doesn't necessarily have a time-bound access most of the time, right? But if you might be thinking, when is it applicable to have a set expiry of a label? So something like, let's say, a time-based events such as um, must be accessed within this period as part of the data retention policy, right? So, and you can also do allow offline access, and then you can do dynamic watermarking or double key encryption, right? But the important thing here is first you need to apply or assign this permission to a specific user or group. Okay, so this is now that part where it intersects with Entra. Okay, so with Entra, basically, whether you apply that to a user or a group, that's within the domain of Entra, or you can also apply this to all users and groups in your organization, right? Then you can also do add any authenticated user or specific email addresses or domains. So most of the time you go with a specific user, let's say John Rich, right? And then save, or usually in a group, right? And then perform next. Now, this is that part where you can apply the custom headers or this kind of like watermarking of the data, right? So you can apply that. So you can do add watermark. So what's in the watermark? So maybe something like this is confidential, do not share, right? Okay, so that becomes a watermark text, meaning that like the one that kind of like goes to the document like that. When you see that big confidential sign in most movies, so that's kind of like that one, and you can even make it like 30, 35, or as big or as small as you want, right? You can also apply font color. Usually it's red, but you can also do yellow or blue. Then the text layout could be diagonal, which is the common, right? The common layout for a watermark text. And then the header, right? You can also do that. Say this confidential, do not share as well, and a footer, right? So this is this confidential, do not share, right? Now, in terms of next, right? And you can also apply auto labeling directly for files and emails, wherein if it detects that it matches this particular set of requirements, such as, there is, if you tag an email with, let's say, confidential, then you can automatically label that as well. All right. Um, then you can also define the protection settings for groups and site, such as in terms of the privacy and external user access, as well as external sharing and conditional access policy as well. All right. So I've already created the label before, which is the financial highly confidential, right? So in here, all right, let me just edit this label so that just shows you, right? So same thing, I chose that one, then I only applied it to both files and emails, and then the items are that one. Apply the permission now, and I made John Rich the co-author for this one. I'll show you why in a bit. And then I place this one. We're in a watermark. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Let's make it 35, and then the header probably 20, right? And then here a footer, you can set it to like 13. All right. Okay. Then next, I didn't enable the auto labeling for files and emails, and then I leave that empty as well. And then I've saved that label. All right. So this might take a little bit of time, but again, this exercise, right, is really good because one is that this is really where the data governance team becomes empowered, right? Wherein they have a tool which is Purview that wherein they don't get to just use SQL servers or a database, right? They actually have a proper data tool to use. Right, I'll skip that for now, and then I can publish this label. All right. Then next, I can if you have an E5 license, you can create an admin unit as well. And for users and groups, I basically publish this to all users and groups for now. And here's some settings as well such as users must provide a justification to remove a label or lower its classification, and so on, right? But I've already published earlier, and I'll get onto it now. Okay, so um, basically for this one, just like to show you in my test tenant here, right? We do have these two users. We got John Rich and Mike Lowe, right? So John Rich is the finance co-creator, right? That's why he's rich. And then Mike Lowe is an external user, is a guest, and to an extent, right? Like have only a low level of security privilege in within the organization. That's why it's Mike Lowe, right? Now, the common approach of when you go with Entra, right, is to actually create groups, such as if you go to all groups, you kind of like assign them to, let's say, finance high risk data access, right? It's a security group. You can do that, right? And then from that, you add members, right? Such as in this case, you can add John Rich as a member of this security group, right? So this is kind of like a good practice in terms of like, let's say any Azure based services to just add that. And so you enable access to the finance high risk data access, but not to the member itself, right? Now, this one here, what I'm going to show you now is that in here, what I've done is that I am currently logged in as Michael, right? So Michael is me, literally, is the global admin, and I am the owner of this particular SharePoint group. Okay, so I am the owner and a global admin. Okay, so that's very important context, right? Because basically, I literally created the tenant, right? I'm the owner of the tenant. I am the owner of the company. I created this SharePoint site, and yeah, and basically that means that um, I do have administrative access to almost anything, right? And in here, I added two members as I added Mike Lowe as a guest and John Rich as well as a member, right? So in this one, right? So what I would like to show you is that now let me log in as John Rich. Okay, so let me open the persona of John Rich. Okay, there we go. So I open a new tab or a new private window, and I'm currently logged in as John Rich. Okay, so now this John Rich guy, right? So if you remember in Purview, I applied that sensitivity label policy to John Rich. Okay, so now what I can do as John Rich is that I can create a document, right? Um, all right, let me just delete this for now. Okay. All right. You see, it won't allow you to open the file. It won't allow you to delete the file because again, this is in SharePoint. So in SharePoint, it still honors the concept of locked files, right? So that means that even if I created that document, I can't delete that. All right. So that means that I can go in and try to edit the document. All right. So this one here, you would see a couple of things, right? First off, you would see this sensitivity label in there. It says it's financial, highly confidential, and these are all the watermarks that we were talking about earlier, right? That we have the header as the financial, highly confidential, and you have the footer as well over there, property, and then you have that watermark kind of like shows you around that. And you might be thinking, can I just remove this? Yes, you can, right? Can I remove the headers? Yep. Yes, I can. All right. Yep. I can do that. All right. That's optional, right? That is because those are kind of like semantics as part of that. Right. Now, what I'll do is that I'll close this preview. Okay. But ensuring that the sensitivity label is still financial, highly confidential. All right. So now I'm gonna try and access this document. All right. So given that, hey, um, Mike Lowe is also a um, a member of this particular SharePoint group. All right. So let me try that now. I'll try to sign in as Mike Lowe. All right. All right. There you go. So in here, I am now logged in as Mike Lowe. All right. So Mike Lowe. Okay, let me just refresh this page. And I see that John Rich created a document or modified the document just a minute ago. So let me try to open that. And there you go, right? Sorry, you don't have permission to open this document. Why is that, right? Because we've applied the sensitivity label and the policy as well as part of that. Okay, so that means that even though I'm a member of this SharePoint group, okay, so even if I'm a member of the SharePoint group, that doesn't automatically allow me to open this document, right? And that's very important context, right? Because that means that if let's say there's so many documents out there in your SharePoint libraries that eventually wasn't really tracked or applied the sensitivity label, and by default I do have access, then you can apply a conditional this particular sensitivity label protection to apply that even if I am a member of the SharePoint group. All right. But here's the thing, right? Since I'm a member, I can also create my own. Yeah, I can still create my own um, document, right? And this is a fake salary, right? For many reasons. Because one, that's not true. And second is that it's not properly formatted, but also because I don't have the sensitivity label here. Okay, so because I don't have the policy applied to me, right, as Mike Lowe. So you see the boundary of that highly sensitive financial information is just bounded towards John Rich. Okay, so it's only John Rich who have access to any financial highly sensitive information. Okay, but here's another test to think of, right? Okay, so does that mean um, can John Rich access Mike Lowe's document? Well, most likely yes, right? So let me just open that real quick. Again, John Rich trying to access the fake salary. Let's try that. Yes, John Rich can open that. Okay, because again, this is through the SharePoint permission, right? So because we're all collaborating within SharePoint, we get access to the same document. All right, but then, funny enough, Mike Lowe cannot access salaries 2025. All right, now here's where it really gets interesting. But how about Michael? Right? How about me, who's the actual owner of the tenant? All right, would you guess if I do have access to this? Right, I am the owner of this SharePoint group, and I am the global admin of this tenancy. Would I have access to the salaries 2025? All right, so that's a really good and interesting question, right? Well, because for the fake salary, obviously I can access this, no problem with that. But can I access the salaries 2025? All right, so without putting much more intense, let me just open the file, and the answer is no. All right, so even if I am the owner of that SharePoint site, even if I am the global admin of this tenancy, I don't necessarily have access to that document, okay? Because it's protected using the Azure Information Protection. All right, so That's very interesting, right? Because that means that you can really use this to set policies, or let's say, with all of these co-pilot capabilities and just exposing all of this information, internal information across your organization. Maybe this is just about, creating policies or sensitivity to begin with, right? Let's say specific information such as when there's confidential, just start with that, right? Label them, right? And then so Copilot won't be able to pick them up, right? And unless you do have the right access for those set of information, because at the end of the day, that's still tied into your Entra ID. Okay, so now, okay, I don't have access to the salaries 2025. Okay, but what's interesting is that I can, right, create a Word document, all right, and let's say call this um, um right, another fake salary, right? But since I am a global admin and I am part of the I do inherited the um, purview administrator role, okay, or the role that allows me to configure purview. That would still allow me to set sensitivity label myself. All right, so there's that difference, right? That even though that policy doesn't apply to me specifically, I would still be able to create sensitive information. All right, so in here, right, this is uh, uh, okay. So there you go. Now, if I save this, right, and again, given that it's financial highly confidential, all right, let me close this, right? Now we have three documents here. The question becomes, can Greg Lowe now access this another fake salary document? Sorry, not Greg Lowe, Mike Lowe. Can you access this document? All right, let's see. He still can't, right? Because again, it's still marked as that sensitivity label, right? So that means that because Mike Lowe is neither a part of that policy nor a inherited the purview um, role around this permission, Mike Lowe can't access this particular document. All right, but what if can John Rich, who we've applied a policy, can he access this document? All right, now let's try that. Okay, so again, I am John Rich here. All right, let me just close that. Now let's open this another fake salary. Can I open this? The answer is yes. All right, so that means that applying that sensitivity label, right, is very important, and that means that having that administrative capability is also very important, right? And that means that being a member of this highly confidential label allows me to open any highly confidential label, even if I'm not an owner, even if I'm not, because it's about data access, right? So it's about data access. So again, that is really, a good scenario that kind of like shows you how all of this data protection policy or data information protection actually works. All right, but can I modify this? All right, can I save that? Yes. Okay, so if I go back as Michael, mm, all right, if I go back as Michael, can I save that? Can I open that? Yes. Right, you see, um, John Rich was able to edit document. Okay. All right. Now, that's really the fundamentals of information protection. All right. Now, in here, there are also other policies that you can explore later on, such as label publishing policies, protection policies, which is currently in preview, right? And then you can also create classifiers, such as trainable classifiers, and this is where the whole ML model would come in later on. And yeah, it requires an E5 as well, right? And then here's some explorers that you can also use. Wherein this one here is instead of the data mapping, wherein you're trying to map information. This is something you can use to kind of like just explore different info within your organization, such as in Exchange. I do have 1,733 items in there, right, that you can kind of like use and explore. And you can also see other related solutions that we will be talking about in the future, right? Particularly next month, we will be talking about DLP. All right. So that's about it. Okay. So that wraps up our track 3 for this month or for this time around, where we talked about information protection. All right. So with that, guess I'll be waiting. Isabel, we probably didn't have any question, but again, happy to wrap up or answer
Yeah.
some questions.
Thank you, MJ. That was a really good session. It looks like we have no questions in the chat. But MJ, if in case anyone from our audience or anyone who's watching at home after this session, where would be the best way to reach out to you?
All right. So the best way to reach out to me is on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm not active in other social media, only on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But yeah, even LinkedIn is kind of like getting funny these days. But yeah, particularly if you can message me on LinkedIn, that's the best way forward. All right.
Perfect. Thank you, MJ. I will pop in MJ's LinkedIn profile in the chat. We do have a comment from Pablo saying thank you. It was greatly presented, and I agree, MJ. You've done great sessions. And just to for everyone in our audience at the moment, I will pop in this link. It's aka.ms/data mixtape. If you just go over and register to the rest of the sessions. We have a couple more sessions going for the rest of the year. So we'll be seeing you guys here the first Wednesday of every month. So please make sure you register and stay up to date with the upcoming sessions, or you may also visit the Reactor website. Additionally, I'm just going to pop in this slide right here. We do have a Discord community and a GitHub discussion board. If you guys want to scan the QR codes and join these Microsoft AI communities, we are more than happy to have you guys join. But aside from that, I will be wrapping up today's session. Once again, MJ, thank you so much for a great presentation. And if you guys missed anything, just give us 24 to 48 hours. You're going to be able to go back and rewatch any part of the session on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. But aside from that, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you next month. All right.
See you next month, everyone. Bye.
Bye.